Those of you who are familiar with this channel know that most of the time when I'm doing my Let's Plays, I usually am all about trying to make the campaign more difficult, but every once in a while it can be nice to have a change of pace, to have an easier start to a campaign, or maybe an easier campaign overall, maybe, you know, just more of a chill, laid-back type of experience. And so that's what this video is about. I've done a little bit of testing between a few of the different factions here to try to determine what I believe is the easiest beginning to a campaign of any of the legendary lords that you can choose from. Now, there's a couple of really good candidates, I think. Before I start getting into those, I just want to mention a couple of things overall. So first of all, not too long ago, I released a video that was called The Best Starting Campaigns for New or Returning Players. And that's kind of similar to the idea of this, but I don't necessarily equate best with easiest. And in fact, the faction that I've identified here is not one of them that I mentioned in the best starting campaign for new and returning players video. The other things to keep in mind, this is of course going to be in Immortal Empires, Warhammer 3, Vanilla, and it is using legendary very hard difficulty, which is what I always play on. But of course, obviously, it's still going to apply if you use an easier difficulty. And so to jump right into it, for the TLDR version, the strongest starting campaign is, of course, none other than good old Skrulk. Skrulk is just an incredibly powerful... Okay, I'm completely kidding. This is actually not at all the easiest. This is actually one of the most difficult starting campaigns. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of humor here. So let's talk about some of the honorable mentions first. The other factions that I think have a pretty easy start and that I considered for this video. The first one being good old Archaon. It's really difficult to lose a campaign of Archaon, I believe. You have one fight on your very first turn to take your first Dark Fortress, and then from there it's a pretty much do whatever you want to type of a campaign. Warriors of Chaos in general are extremely strong, but you do have a couple of tough enemies, namely Kislev, Boris, that you have in the early going that you kind of have to deal with, and you can get bogged down a little bit fighting him. So I decided not to make him the easiest starting campaign, namely for that reason, because you can really get stuck with only one or two Dark Fortresses in the early going and then get yourself bogged down into a war. So another faction that I considered is Tyrion, who of course has quite an easy campaign. I did talk about him in the best campaigns for new or returning players. He's got an easy start. He starts out with a very strong capital city. He can very quickly defeat his starting enemy and take over that first province. And he is, in fact, I think, going to be one of the easier campaigns in the early game. However, I've identified another one that is even easier than his is. So enough said about him. I did also want to mention Thorek as well. He's got a pretty easy starting campaign. Again, he can take out Arachnos pretty quickly and have himself a nice starting province to deal with, or to start out with. And from that point, it can be a fairly easy campaign, because you're not really under any duress there in the early game. Once you start to expand, it gets a little bit more challenging, but your capital city, it takes a long time before anybody's going to really mount any serious invasion of that. So again, kind of like with Archaon, you're in a really strong starting location, and you can just sort of expand at your own pace from that point forward. Another pretty easy starting campaign is Ikaclaw of the Skaven. Skaven Blade, again, really easily defensible starting location. You can kind of expand into Warhammer Spain, Estalia, fairly quickly if you want to. You can head eastward and take out the other minor factions around you there. Forget the name of the one, that's Warhammer Italy. But anyway, you get my meaning. You do, however, start to bump into Aranessa fairly quickly. You start bumping into the dwarfs fairly quickly. And so, although it's a pretty easy start in terms of not having to worry about losing your capital anytime soon, it doesn't take very long before you have some challenges that are at least going to slow you down. Now, Claw does have access to some really, really strong weapon teams units in the early going. So again, he's not a bad choice at all. Certainly of any of the Skaven, I think he's the easiest starting Skaven Legendary Lord. But again, I think that there's a better choice out there for a faction that allows you to really expand incredibly quickly and also have an incredibly powerful early game army, and that's what I'm going to get to here in a moment. And so I suppose I will stop beating around the bush and go ahead and reveal the legendary Lord that I believe has the easiest early game in Warhammer 3 is Isabella von Carstein. Isabella von Carstein has such an easy start. You can have your second major settlement as early as turn 2. If you really want to, if you push it a little bit. Certainly it's very easy to take it by turn 3. You can have a very, very strong starting army by turn 4, I believe it is. You can have 2 entire provinces, 6 regions in total, under your thumb by turn 6. All of this without really any difficult fighting at all. You can have your 3rd province under control before you even get the quest that is the mission that is issued to ask you to take over 3 provinces. You can really, really start to dominate your enemies very, very quickly from the early game. So, pretty easy choice, I think, overall. There's other good choices that are obviously easy starts to their campaigns, but I've never come across any that's as easy as she is. So let's go ahead and talk about the reasons why. So the number one reason why is the vampire heroes that she has access to. She gets a lot of them from the very beginning, and we'll go into the details when I jump into the campaign here and show you exactly how. But it's quite simple. Her starting enemy is very easily beatable and has some good territory for you to take. And her starting position is reasonably strong, so you don't really have to worry about defense at all. You can just go straight onto the attack from the very beginning of the game. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about some examples here why she is so strong. Okay, I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible, so I'm not going to go through like all the things about how the vampire counts play. What makes her so much stronger than the other vampire accounts is her access to vampires right away. She also starts out with the addition of an extra legendary hero in addition to the normal hero that everybody starts out with. So right away, boom, you've got 3 characters in your starting army. But here's the important thing, is you take a look here at Castle Drakenhof. Castle Drakenhof is great. It gives you gold mining building here, the Tarnished Gold Shaft, which is early income, but that's nothing special. Most starting factions have something like that to get them rich in the early going. But this right here, the Mausoleum of the Mad Count. This immediately unlocks vampire recruitment, increases your hero capacity for vampires, and keep in mind that Isabella herself already has bonus hero capacity for vampires. This increases the hero recruit rank for vampires. It only takes 2 turns to build, and of course it reduces pretty drastically the hero recruitment cost for vampires. So what you're talking about is by turn 3, you can have this thing built, and you can go ahead and have 5 vampires available to you, starting out at level 4 for the most part, which, boom, get them in your starting army, and your starting army at that point is already pretty strong. It does not take very long for vampires to unlock the hunger, which is their form of regeneration. She boosts them in combat. They're already pretty good character units, so you're talking about really good starting army, whereas most factions are having to deal with like tier 1 and tier 2 units from the very beginning. You've got yourself access to some pretty strong characters that are just going to get stronger the more battles that you fight. Now I'm going to mention a little bit of my advice for how to go about building your starting settlement, but obviously, play the game the way that you want to play, do what you want to do. There's certainly room for a little bit of variation in how you do this, and it would still be a very strong start. But I am going to recommend that you build your special building here, your landmark building, from turn 1, and then you really don't need your recruitment buildings here. You start out with one in each of your 2 starting settlements. You really don't need either one of them. So I actually recommend demolishing both of them, and then you're going to replace those with income-producing buildings for the most part. Now, the reason why you don't need your recruitment buildings in the immediate early game is because you have the raise dead mechanic. So you actually have access to filling out your army right away just from the raise dead mechanic, and you don't need any recruitment buildings at all to use that. Now, here's the trick. You actually don't even need to raise any dead in the very beginning of this game, because your starting battles for the first couple of turns are so easy that your starting army is going to be good enough to win them without even any additional units that you recruit in through raise dead. So why waste the money? So you can see right here, boom, it's a pretty simple fight against Tempelhof. It's already a close victory, like I said, without recruiting in any additional units. I would always recommend that you fight the battle manually. You will do better and suffer fewer casualties, but you could go ahead and auto-resolve this if you wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and do that just for speeding things along right here, because this is an easy battle. You've got one slightly trickier battle coming up in turn 3 that is definitely going to be one that, well, I should say definitely, is most likely going to be one that you will want to fight manually, and I'll show you a little bit about how I would recommend fighting that. But this one right here, obviously not going to be too tricky at all. Go ahead and assign your skills, and I recommend getting the hunger for any characters as quickly as possible. So again, you could raise dead before you attack your starting the next settlement here, but you don't really need to. Again, you can very easily win that battle even without having raised any dead. So keep in mind, if you ever, if you are starting out and you feel more comfortable having some additional units here, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going ahead and doing it. I just wanted to not do it to show that you really don't need to. I will go ahead and recruit in a couple of additional skeletons, just because we are going to have a slightly more difficult battle coming up in turn 3. Doesn't hurt to go ahead and start getting a couple of extra units into the army. And of course, when you're doing these early settlements, I would suggest focusing on income buildings and growth buildings. You want to grow your province as quickly as you can, but you need to balance that with actually having enough money to be able to afford the buildings and, of course, to also maintain your army. In terms of the technology, I don't think there's anything special. Eventually, you're going to unlock some more powerful things down the line that are going to help out Isabella's army in particular, but right away, I don't think it makes a huge difference. So I went ahead and just grabbed the first one here. Nothing special to worry about in terms of diplomacy right away. Now note that you could go ahead and make peace with Tempelhof right away, and that will become increasingly true as you move forward through the turns here. The more damage you do to them in the first couple of turns, the more money they would be willing to give you to make peace with them. I highly recommend not doing so, because you're going to be stealing all of your additional territory from them. And you can see there's an army that they move over here into Waldenhof, and you've got 2 choices at this point. So if you remember, I mentioned that you could take your second major city, major settlement as early as turn 2, well, you could go ahead and do that this turn if you wanted to. You could head west and take Castle Tempelhof, but I'm going to recommend that you actually come up here and wipe out their army first. You take out their army, and then at this point they would be undefended, and the rest of all of their territory, including Castle Tempelhof, is yours for the taking. So it's worth spending the one turn, wipe out what little military they have here. Now what I would do is I would recommend sacking and moving back to Eschen instead of occupying it, and that's because you want to make sure that you can easily reach Castle Tempelhof next turn. Again, diplomatically, they'd be very happy to make peace with us, but we don't really want to do that. I go ahead and recruit in a couple more skeletons because it is going to be a little bit tougher taking Castle Tempelhof than these early combats have been. And so boom, here we are, turn 3. The mausoleum has been built, giving us access to recruit in these vampire units. Now, I think it makes sense to go ahead and recruit them in, but of course, when you first recruit a hero, they don't have any movement on the turn, so they're not going to be able to join us this turn. But go ahead and get them recruited, and you can add them to the army starting next turn. All that means is that the battle against Castle Tempelhof, you're going to be able to go ahead and do that anyway, even without the vampires, but they're not going to gain the experience that they would get from participating in that fight. That's all it means. What I do is I make most of the vampires beefier in melee combat from the very beginning. She does buff them to help them be able to do that, but I do make sure that I've got one spellcaster for each of the 2 schools of magic, so I did make one of the one of the vampires here more of a spellcaster than a melee combatant. But again, you can do whatever you want to with respect to that. Now, what we do, we go ahead and grab Isabella's army, march on Castle Tempelhof, and as you can see, it's already a Pyrrhic victory if we were to do the auto-resolve. Now, I am going to recommend that you not do the auto-resolve because you don't want to lose those units. So, first thing that you can do, first trick is go ahead and recruit in using Raise Dead from this point right here. I will say, I've done this a couple of times. Sometimes you have access to Graveguard in your Raised Dead pool, which makes this fight a little bit easier. Go ahead and grab those if you can. They weren't available to me on this playthrough, so it just means it's going to be a little bit trickier of a fight, but it's really, again, not that big of a deal. Go ahead and hop in and fight this battle manually, and it's a pretty straightforward fight. The main thing that you want to keep in mind when you're playing the vampire counts is that it's not a big deal if you lose skeletons and zombie units, bat units, these things are basically just chaff. Go ahead and throw them, waste them if you want to, throw them around, get them killed. Some of them will come back anyway, even after the battle's over because of the dead rise again. But in any case, you just pretty much have a steady stream of those things available to you in the Raised Dead pool. So it's really things like the Graveguard that are a little bit bigger deal. But, even Graveguard is not that big of a deal if you lose some of them. So the way that I suggest attacking this, and I should make this very clear, I should have said this at the very beginning, I don't use any cheese tactics in my battles, nor in the campaign. So if you're looking for cheese tactics, then I'm not the guy to learn from. I think the game is reasonably easy anyway, even once you get to be pretty good at it, even without using cheese tactics, so I'm not going to be using any of those here. Anyway, so what I do is I basically want to make my main assault on the undefended side of the city. This is a pretty easy city layout to attack because there are no towers over here on this side. So I go ahead and put my best single entity units over here, get them ready to go driving in from that particular side. And basically I use all of the skeletons and all of the melee infantry units as sort of a diversionary attack. So go ahead and launch them at the walls. That way they bog down a fair number of the enemy units. Some of them are probably going to get themselves killed. Doesn't really matter. The bulk of your strength is in your characters and also your Vargulf. So as long as you keep those things alive, then you're in pretty good shape. So pretty straightforward battle overall. You can go ahead and get your legendary Lord and Hero up there on the wall, do some fighting. They're going to throw lots of units at you. Because you are still relatively low level, it's going to take a little bit of time, but just stick with it. Now, one thing that happens here is pretty typical in Warhammer, unfortunately, is the AI pathfinding with the gate is completely busted, and my Vargulf here actually ends up getting trapped where he cannot leave. He cannot actually do any more damage to the gate because it's technically open, but he can't leave because it's not technically broken down yet. It looks like he's kind of inside, but he's really not. So it's just a real mess. Be careful with that. I was a little bit reckless here with the Vargulf, but again, not really that big of a deal. He doesn't die in this battle, as long as you're careful. The only things that you should lose in this battle are your melee infantry, which I already said are pretty expendable. And so fast forward to the end of the battle. Like I said, lost a tiny little bit of melee infantry, really not that big of a deal. And go ahead and occupy Castle Tempelhof, and boom, already, here we are, turn 3, and we've got 4 settlements, 2 of them being major settlements. So really good start already, but it gets better as we move forward in the next few turns. Turn 4, your starting enemy, Tempelhof, has essentially no military at all at this point. Obviously, they'll recruit in 1 lord here, but you can very easily just march on down, attack him right away, and wipe out not only his lord, but you can go ahead and occupy then Fort Oberstyre. And so at this point, you've got yourself, on turn 4, you've got 5 settlements. Your enemy is down to only a single settlement with no military left to defend it, and the garrison itself has already been weakened by the attack that you did on turn 2. So you still just have the 1 army. It's all you need at this point, but you've got not only Isabella and not only Vlad, but you've got 5 additional vampires in the army with you. Very strong starting army. And then nothing fancy here at this point. You just go ahead and race back up there towards your final target. Now you cannot reach it to attack in 1 turn, but that's just fine. Go ahead and get as close to it as you can. There's really nothing that they can do about it. And just set yourself up so that on the next turn you're going to be able to take it. And so here you go. Boom. Province secured. You've now got yourself turn 6, 2 full provinces, 6 settlements total, and no enemies on the map at this point. Now, there'll be more enemies popping up soon enough, of course, but really, really strong start already. Here we are at only turn 6. And now you'll get your first quest battle mission popping up. Well, that's very convenient because you're actually in a really good position right now with no threats and with a pretty strong starting army here. You're already in a position to go ahead and fight your first quest battle. So you obviously want to do this at a point in time when your army is relatively strong, doesn't need any additional replenishment, for example, but at this point you really already ought to be there, so really good time to go ahead and fight your quest battle. It's not a particularly difficult one, so you can beat it with just this army. I'll go ahead and show very quickly what the battle looks like. I don't want to give too much away. If you've never experienced it, it's always kind of fun to learn these quest battles on your own, but basically you're just going to kind of be here in the middle with an enemy directly ahead of you, and another enemy is going to end up spawning behind you. Just take them out as quickly as possible. Make sure that you try to keep your most powerful units, all of your single entity units basically, keep them alive throughout the battle. In this case, I didn't even fight this one particularly well. I did end up losing my Grave Guard, but one of them is going to come back anyway, because that's what happens with the vampire accounts. You get the Dead Rise Again mechanic that gives you back some of the units that you lose in battle. So ultimately, as long as you keep all of your characters alive, this battle is pretty straightforward. They get really good experience, you get really good money, and of course you get a legendary item out of it. So definitely worth doing as soon as you can, and like I said, you can pretty conveniently go ahead and do it as soon as it appears for you, because you're already in a very overall strong, safe, strategic position. And so that also will provide plenty of money for you to go ahead and be able to afford to continue to upgrade the buildings in your settlement. And so without using any cheese tactics at all, on turn 6, we already have Isabella at level 10, Vlad at level 9, our vampires mostly at level 8, and of course she's already got herself a legendary magic item. From a strategic standpoint, you have a couple of options at this point. You're not at war with anybody, but you do have some natural enemies all around you. You just kind of get to choose where you want to go. Well, in my case, I felt like Stirland over here is sort of ripe for the plucking, so I decided to head down and attack Stirland and take the moot. But of course, you've also got two different dwarves that you could choose from if you'd rather take the war to them right away. Zufbar down to your southeast, and Karak Kadrin directly to your east. You've got Draika to the north of you. So there's a couple different options. They're not all super aggressive, however, in the very beginning. In my experience, the dwarfs tend to be the most aggressive in terms of declaring war on you, but they're not so strong that you really need to worry about them very much. If you go full speed towards the moot on turn 7, you will find that you are close enough to attack it then on turn 8. You also, of course, don't want to forget that you unlock enough blood kisses to go ahead and choose one of your options here. Now, I chose the bloodline that gives you increased character experience gain, because that just kind of plays right into the fact that you've got all these vampire units. So it's basically just a way to kind of buff them even more. But choose whichever one you consider to be the most fun for your play style. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference overall. And like I said, on turn 8, you can go ahead and take the moot. So it just conveniently happened that the changeling was here close enough to help us out, but it doesn't really matter. You can still pretty easily win that battle, even if they weren't there to reinforce. So at this point, turn 8, you've got 3 provinces under your control. And that's the nice thing about the moot, is it is a single region province. So just this one settlement is enough to give you control of the entire province. So it's good because you get the commandment, but like I said at the very beginning, you've already completed the mission to control 3 full provinces before the mission has even been issued, and it's usually one of the earliest missions that's issued to you. I don't think there are any other campaigns where you could have 3 provinces under your control this quickly without using cheese tactics. Now at this point, the campaign can go a couple of different ways. You just want to basically react to circumstances. In this particular campaign, the changeling stayed right here, and he's actually raiding my territory, so I just decided to go ahead and wipe him out. Easy enough to do. He was actually close enough that the weakened garrison came out to help, although that doesn't really matter at this point. But obviously this is going to be a little bit different probably for everybody. Again, you're going to want to react to circumstances as best you can, and Isabella is in a good position to do that. So with the changeling here taken care of, I was starting to consider, okay, who do I want to be my next enemy? Which direction do I want to expand next? And what ends up happening here is that good old Zufbar makes the decision for me by declaring war on me. It's fairly typical. Obviously, in this game, your enemies are not going to give you very much time to just sit around and not do any fighting at all. After all, this is not a game of Sim City. This is a game of Warhammer Total War. So, Yeah, somebody's going to declare war on you. You just got to be prepared to fight them back. Now, the good news is when it's Zufbar, for example, Castle Drakenhof is strong enough that it's pretty easy to defend. In this particular case, Zufbar comes at me with 2 different armies, and it's absolutely not a big deal. I go ahead and do some raise dead mechanic to get some units into a second army right away, and I go ahead and recruit in a regiment of renown that I probably wasted money on because I really didn't need it. And you can just easily outmaneuver the dwarfs, go ahead and force them, between the combination of the garrison, the small second army, and Isabella's army, we're in a good position to force the dwarfs back, get their army separated, go ahead and wipe out one of them. And in this particular case, they were already at this point willing to make peace with me. So whether or not you want to do that is ultimately up to you. I decided I wasn't terribly interested in going into Zufbar's territory right away. And one real advantage that you have of going ahead and making peace with an enemy like this right away is that you don't have to worry about them as a threat for the next 10 turns or so. And I already had in mind that I was going to go to war with Karak Kadrin, and it's nice to know that you can go to war with Karak Kadrin and not have to worry about Zufbar also declaring war on you, and you end up having to fight both of them at the same time. So that's kind of how this one played out. But like I said, it's going to be a little bit different in different campaigns, so you're going to want to be able to react to circumstances as they appear. Now, the nice thing about Karak Kadrin, first of all, I got a mission for it, so I'm going to get a little bit of bonus money here out of actually going to war with Karak Kadrin. And as long as you take them by surprise, you can actually move on up here to their border with whatever military you've got. Right now, we're not at war with anybody at all, so we don't need to leave any of these armies on the defense anywhere else. We can use them both on this offensive. And as long as you don't declare war on him until you're actually ready to make the attack, you can walk right on up to the gates of Karak Kadrin, and even though it is a walled city, it's pretty easy to just go ahead and take it. And so I think at this point, this is, hopefully this gives everybody the idea about how easy of a campaign this is in the early going. Obviously, intermediate game, the mid game, the end game, completely different story. It's not like this becomes a really hard campaign, but there's enough variation between the different campaigns that I'm not going to try to make the argument that this is the easiest campaign all the way through. But certainly here in the early game, hopefully you can see where I'm coming from. We're only on turn 12. We've already got 8 regions, 3 full provinces, and 3 major settlements, including the capital city of our major enemy at this point. So we're looking in a pretty good strategic situation in terms of continuing the war with Karak Kadrin. They are considerably weakened by the fact that they've lost their capital city. We've got enough forces over here that we can certainly hold them off. We can take their best punch that they throw at us at this point. And it's very, very, very quick start for her. You've got yourself really a lot of settlements, really not that hard to hold on to them at this point in the campaign. And obviously, economically and militarily, we've got ourselves pretty strong situation with all of these vampire units in particular. I went ahead and recruited a couple necromancers as well, got them into these armies. So you're looking really strong in terms of your starting army with all the characters that you've got. Vampires at this point all have regeneration. So yeah, looking pretty good from a military standpoint. And with all the different regions that you have, as long as you focus on your economic buildings, you're pretty strong in terms of your economy as well. So anyway, hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully this has been helpful to some of you. Some of you, I'm sure, have your own ideas in terms of what you think is the easiest early game campaign. And I would encourage you to, yeah, please go ahead and share your thoughts. Many of you have already done that on the other videos I've released, and I appreciate it. We can have some disagreements, of course, as long as we keep it civil, but I think this is a pretty easily defensible selection in terms of the easiest early game campaign in Warhammer 3. But again, like I said, go ahead and share your own thoughts. Let me know whether you agree or disagree. Let me know what other factions or legendary lords you think are really easy to start with, and we'll go ahead and have a discussion about it. So at this point, I think I will go ahead and say thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.